Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from Little Mix, titled Salute. So, okay, let me explain a bit about how my schedule works. At the beginning of each month, I go through the list of albums to be released and I choose the ones that I want to cover. Throughout the month, I make sure to go back through that list multiple times to make sure it's updated if by some chance I miss an album or someone manages to surprise me. And when it comes to albums with release dates that are different for international audiences, I tend to be fairly ambivalent on which date I choose. If the month is busy, I'll typically choose the latest date possible to make sure I get more time to listen to the album and give it a full review. That's one of the main reasons why I didn't cover Little Mix's album Salute when it came out late last year. I rationalized that since it had an American release date in February and given my own nightmarish schedule in October and November of last year, I figured a delay until 2014, that'll be fine. But even with that in mind, I wasn't really excited to cover this record. I've said in the past that I'm not ashamed of my liking of boy bands like the Backstreet Boys or even acts like S Club 7, but I've had mixed luck with girl groups. My favorite, well, that'd probably still be Girls Aloud, but that was more due to the phenomenal production work courtesy of Xenomania rather than the girls' individual performances. And while I'm mostly ambivalent to positive on the Spice Girls, I really could not stand Destiny's Child, who I always thought were the poor man's TLC, and never really grew beyond being a jump-off platform for Beyonce's solo career, because that's what they were. And maybe it was the reason I was a little bit reticent against approaching Little Mix's second album, because the band made it very clear that they were moving away from the pop, club, dance scene towards R&B flavored pop. And while I don't dislike that genre, it's not something that I've always find particularly interesting, particularly when it's backed by Simon Cowell's record label. See, that's the other problem. Simon Cowell has a bad reputation among music circles over the past decade for making sterile copies of what's popular in pop music rather than innovating, and he proved that last year with the insane overproduction on Little Mix's label mate's Fifth Harmony, another girl group that never really resonated with me. In other words, I did not have a good feeling about Salute going into it. Was I wrong? Well, actually, yes. Yes, I was wrong, because Salute by Little Mix, it's not bad at all. In fact, it's actually quite good. I was a little startled about how much I enjoyed big parts of it. Now, I don't want to oversell this because it's not great, but it was certainly better than I would have expected it would be. If I was going to make a boy band comparison, I like this album for most of the same reasons I liked Word of Mouth by The Wanted, at least on a broad general basis. It's an album that understands its scope and plays within that range to make a very solid, very good pop album. So, okay, let's start with the girls themselves. And in the first good step of making a good girl group, Perry, Jessie, Leanne, and Jade actually have distinctive voices and personalities, and they bounce off each other quite well. I probably like Perry and Leanne's voices the most. They have the most texture and passion, and I can see Perry in particular maturing into a pretty potent vocalist with an edge in a couple of years. What's also impressive is that the girls just don't go for sheer volume to overwhelm you with sound and exuberance, and actually do harmonize pretty damn well, even delivering an a cappella tune with Boy and proving that there's some actual talent here behind this pop girl group. And honestly, I don't see them holding on to that pop image and label that much longer, because all of their voices would be a much better fit for R&B. And you know what? The surprises keep coming, because the songwriting, it's not bad either. Sure, it's conventional girl group material, empowerment, dance tracks, love songs, the slamming of bad boyfriends in the TLC or Destiny's Child model, but you know what? It's executed pretty effectively. All the girls have songwriting credits on the majority of the tracks, and that does lend a certain bit of authenticity, which can make some of the songs come across as a little clumsy thanks to their contributions, but you know what? They also feel a little bit more relatable. You can buy someone of their age wrote those songs. I was a little bit irked with Little Me, a song about going back to the past to reassure the girls' younger selves that they'd be okay and they'd grow up to be superstars, but you know what, that's a personal quibble. If you go back in time to boost said girl's self-esteem, she might not build the inner strength on her own to overcome her obstacles, so it's just a matter of paradoxes and me overthinking the song. Outside of that though, my only really other songwriting nitpick is with the title track, but that's always because I'm a little bit leery of pop songs co-opting military stylings. It just comes across a little bit jingoistic to me. Otherwise, Otherwise, though, many of the songs avoid going for easy titillation, which most girl groups did, and instead feel more raw and heartfelt and exposed, exposing actual real integrity behind the material, especially on songs like Good Enough and These Four Walls, which I'll admit, it's a real credit to these girls' emotive performances. And then there's the song Competition, easily the best song on this album by a mile, thanks to being, well, way smarter than it has any right to be. When talking about gender roles and relationship, the girls describe how they like being treated like ladies. They like guys opening the door for them, but they also don't want to be around guys who are going to be assertive alpha male douchebags, and that they don't need competition in the relationship. It falls along the line of Sarah Bareilles' King of Anything, and honestly, the girls performed the song pretty damn effectively. I was impressed by it. But it's also the best song on this album because it felt fresh and new in terms of instrumentation and production. Blaring horns, a good piano riff, and the sharp clattering drums that characterize a lot of Little Mix's better songs. Sort of reminded me a little bit of Can't Hold Us by Macklemore and Ryan Lewis in a very good way. More importantly, it rises above the big problems of this album, which is in the instrumentation and production. Not counting Competition, the instrumentation is at its best when it calls back to the late 90s and early 2000s of modern R&B. And this album borrows heavily from that era whenever it can. Now, this is something that I've noticed about R&B in the past few years. Outside of a few select cases of innovation, many acts have been very content to retrace the ground that R&B has already paved decades ago. And when it's as blatant as it is here, Little Mix can unfortunately come across as a bit of a throwback, and that's a disservice to the band. I admit this. But you know what? Even that's better than the modern beats that this band was given, which are these minimalist, lumpy bass lines and these clattering, looping effects that don't give the songs the slightest element of tune or good melody. If they're going to call back to the 90s girl groups, why didn't they grab some of the Spice Girls' obscenely catchy hooks that guaranteed those songs would stick in the memory and would become karaoke staples until the end of time? And you know what? At this point, I'm not blaming Little Mix for this. The girls are seriously talented. They weren't the ones handling the production, and they deserve better production work than Simon Cowell' record label is willing to give them. And his production methodology is all over this album. Finding ideas that worked in the pop sphere of either today or a decade ago, and then crushing them into something that's unfortunately not that interesting. You get the depressing feeling that there wasn't a consistent amount of effort by the producers put into the instrumentation, and that they just weren't giving it all, their all in terms of production, and even less effort was put there. The saddest example of this was in Good Enough, a song that has a ton of real, raw emotion that was really potent and really passionate, but the reverb is so poorly executed that it just couldn't help but take away from the song as a whole. But you know what? It's not something that the average pop fan will hear. And thus, you can tell that the producers didn't put in that little extra bit of effort to make it sound cohesive or remotely natural, which I gotta admit was really quite disappointing because as someone who is a fan of pop music and good pop production. Look, overall, I did really quite like this album. It was certainly a welcome surprise for me, and you know what? Competition just keeps getting better and better every time I listen to it, but I do wish this album was more consistently strong and had better high points. Little Mix is a group crying out for a Max Martin or a Timbaland or a Pharrell to step up and give these girls some real killer hooks and some real solid production to make them stand out, or at least some better melody lines, not the bland slurry with occasional moments of greatness that Simon Cowell's just dumping on them instead. That being said, the vocals, the harmonies, and especially the songwriting was all a fair bit better than I expected. Plus, there were no tracks on this album that I could call out as being objectively bad. A little bit bland maybe, but not aggressively hateable or something that I could actively dislike. So you know what? I'm gonna give this album a light 7 out of 10 and something of a cautious recommendation. If you're looking for a fix of pop R&B that calls back to the late 90s, if you're nostalgic for TLC or Destiny's Child at all, give Little Mix a listen. You might be surprised in a good way. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or if there's any other albums coming out in 2014 that you'd like me to cover, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. So until then, see you next time.